All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your patience. If you're visiting from off campus, welcome to Point Loma Green University. My name is Andy Nosel. I'm a biology professor here at Point Loma. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker this afternoon, iconographer and liturgical artist Aidan Hart. A little bit about Aidan. He's a member of the Greek Orthodox Church living in Britain and has been a full-time liturgical artist now for over 40 years. His passion is to create works in church interiors that reflect something of the beauty of life in Christ and to help people experience that union of heaven and earth, which is the ultimate purpose of liturgical art. Aidan works in a wide variety of mediums, including egg tempera for panel icons, stone and wood carving, mosaic, and wall painting. He has works in over 25 countries of the world, commissioned by Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and Anglican cathedrals, monasteries, individuals, and royalty. Among his most recent works is the new icon of creation we see before us, the Transfiguration of Creation. Hopefully you got to see it in chapel this morning and hear from Aidan. In addition to making icons, Aidan trains others also how to make icons through special classes and apprenticeships. Lastly, Aidan is an accomplished writer, having authored 4 books on iconography, including arguably the most comprehensive reference book on the techniques of iconography, as well as many more articles on liturgical art, ecology, and Orthodox spirituality. We're very blessed to have him here at Point Loma and look forward to his talk this afternoon. Let's thank Aidan and welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yep, good. Well, welcome everyone, those who've come from far and from near. So this particular talk, and I'll give you a number of talks, this particular talk is centered on the technique that I use to paint this icon and other icons, but it's not just hopefully a technical thing. I want to show the theology and the use of icons and how that influences how we make them. Just a few points first. The icon acts as a door between heaven and earth, and therefore it represents saintly subjects in the heavenly glory. And hence these are things like gold, radiant stylistic abstraction. In other words, we're not just, as it were, showing them photographically. We're trying to show their inner spiritual state. And that explains why they're done in a slightly abstract way. We're trying to indicate the inner and the outer. And icons are used in the Orthodox Church. They're kissed by way of greeting the person depicted. They're processed, they're handled. So they're made of robust material. That's why we don't paint them on canvases. They'll just fall apart. So that's why wood for panel icons is the most common thing. Some people say, well, why do you use egg tempera? This is painted with egg tempera. I'll tell you what that means a little bit later. But oil paint takes long to dry, so you tend towards sort of more blended, slightly more sentimental effects. Egg tempera goes for crisper, I would say slightly more spiritual effect. But anyway, so the use of the icon affects materials and all sorts of things, because it's not so much something to sit and look at, it's something you use. If you've been to an icon exhibition with really old icons, you'll notice at the bottom is quite got burnt marks on it because of the candles in front. Bits are knocked off it because it's been used in procession. I literally loved to this. So there are 2 mediums that are used. In the very early church, they were made of wax. The photograph on the left is a famous icon of Christ from about the 6th century, now St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Desert. Virtually all icons for the first centuries until about the 7th century are made with this medium. So what you do is you warm up wax, then you mix in pigment with it, and while it's still warm, you paint with it, or often use a spatula. But for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure what, after the 9th century, they changed to using egg tempera. So this is egg yolk binding pigments, and this is the method used here. So this method I'm using is at least 1,300 years old. It's got a proven track record. So I'll just go through how I made this particular icon. You don't need to read the writing, I just put it there. There's an indication of some of the thought processes and the writing that went into it. So I started with Professor Nossel emailing me and having a very brief explanation of what he had in mind. So then, through lots of conversations by email, we sort of brainstormed, just in written form, about what we wanted the icon to do. So that's always the first stage, really. What is the icon saying? What's the content of it? Not worrying too much about how to do this initially. So having established the basic outline of the content, then it's my job to research past images that have elements I thought could be used. I think it's a mistake in modern life to think of tradition as limiting you. Why not be something new? Forget about the past. But tradition is really the accumulation of wisdom from the past. When you go to study mathematics, you don't start mathematics from scratch. You study what has already been discovered. And then if you're a good mathematician, you'll add something. Science, art, everything's like that. We start with the wisdom of the past and build on that. We stand on the shoulders of others. So my first stage after doing the brainstorming about the content is to look for images to get ideas. So the one on the left is from St. Mark's Furnace and depicts the days of creation. The one on the right is called All Creation Rejoices in You. The Mother of God, the Mother of Christ is in the middle there. So I like that idea, that the whole of creation is involved in this icon, not just people. So I was beginning to form ideas of how we could possibly express what we wanted. And the basic idea was to combine discoveries of science with theology, not sort of dry academic theology, but to try to integrate how this material world, our bodies, plants, animals, the mineral kingdom, all the kingdoms, were part of our spiritual life, part of our way of knowing Christ, and part of the whole history of mankind toward the New Jerusalem. So that was the main brief, if you like. So the question was, how do I express this? And art and writing are different. Writing can get into the detail, but an art object has got to distill that into the most important thing, so it looks beautiful. It's no use just sort of tumbling a whole lot of facts out into an image. It's got to have a unity and a beauty to it. So that's the big challenge, really, how to include all this detail that Andy was sent my way into something that's integrated. So I was interested in how to depict the New Jerusalem, just very basically how it's ended up, so you can start at the end and go back to the beginning. These are the days of creation here, but we wanted not just to stop with creation, stop with Genesis 1, but go right through to the end of the scriptures, the New Jerusalem. In other words, this is an icon of a procession from the beginning to the culmination of creation, which is where the bride and the bridegroom come together, and Christ and the church come together. So I knew I wanted some way of depicting the New Jerusalem as St. John describes it in his vision and described in the book of Revelation. So it had 4 walls and 12 gates. So I wanted all those gates to be shown. One of the interesting things about icons is that we paint things how we know them rather than as they appear with our eyes. So, for example, if you're depicting an altar, we know the altar's got a left side and a right side as well as a front and a top. So we depict it with all those sides showing. So these 2 sides might be sticking out like that. And where you are, you can't see the top. So in an icon, you tip the top up. So you're seeing from about 3 or 4 points of view at the same time. Isn't that wonderful? Picasso did that. Children often do that. So I wanted all the 12 gates to be visible. So in the end, I drew ideas from the image here on the right. It's an 11th century fresco. I adapted it, but that's why, even though John says that New Jerusalem was square, I did it this way, so all 12 gates are visible. And I'll share in a minute why the gates are important. So having established the main content, and then as it were fed into my imagination, probably about 100 different icons from the past that had elements I thought I could use. Then I started sketching ideas. So there are about 6 sketches I'll show you. So you can see more or less in the correct order how rough they are. It's really important not to fix on an idea too early. It's called brainstorming. So I just play around with ideas. If the 2 work, you get a bit precious about them. So it's got to be rough enough to feel, oh, that's how to work, throw it away, and on that bit's work, but not the whole thing. So you've got to remain a bit free of what you're doing, not be too attached. So you can see I more or less from the beginning decided to go with this basic idea of a semicircle, which represents heaven, or God. That's a perfect endless circle, with a square, which in most cultures represents the created world. We have the four elements, four corners of the earth, and so on. So in all these sketches, that's the one constant, this union of heaven and earth. So the question then was the cross. You can see here the cross, the tree of life. And I had this idea of starting with the first day of creation. We wanted to have some union of scientific discoveries with the poetic description of the 6 days of creation, but having some sort of direction. So I thought, well, we start horizontal along the bottom, and then as you go up, it comes to point toward Christ. So that was a fairly early idea. So you can see what you can see there. So gradually I'm developing this idea of the creation in the lower part, experimenting with the New Jerusalem walls. You see on the left one there, it's sort of like a hexagon. Wasn't that happy with that. That's too dominant. But the idea of angels around the top, you can see them there already. So you can see things were getting clearer. I wanted trees, wasn't quite sure how to include those. Then this one on the right here, we're getting a bit closer. So you can see the thinking of just trying by small iterations. So then Andy was inputting his scholarship about the order, probably the order of things developing. Amphibians or fish become amphibians and go into ground, and then they become walking creatures and so on. So you will see that in the final work, you've got this movement through the whole of history this way toward Christ, but also you've got this horizontal movement from the outside in. That is more like the scientific development of species, from the outside toward the inside. So then I looked around for images of the different species. We wanted all the different species. Initially I just photocopied images from the internet of those. So as you can see, we're getting to the content, then to the general idea, then the composition, and then the details. Now, in the top left-hand corner here, you see this mosaic. What do you notice about? I'm going to engage you a bit now. What do you notice about the change of colour around the tree? Something changes around the tree of that mosaic in the top left. Yes? Exactly, yeah, exactly. And this is a theme that comes again and again. Of course, saints have halos, but one of the whole points of this was that all of creation can participate in the Lord's glory. There's a lovely verse in Hebrews which says, God upholds all things by the word of his power. God upholds, he doesn't just create, but he upholds all things by the word of his power. And the word in the original Greek, word, is rhemati, which means spoken word. So I wanted to show that it's not only us who are spiritual beings, but through us, like feasts of creation, everything from stone to animal to trees can shine with the glory of God. Obviously in a different way than us who've got free will and can love in a way a tree can't, but everything can have this word of God, the spoken word of God shining through it. So you can see that those little glows around, if you come up close to the end, each tree has a bit of a yellow around it. So I got that idea from this marvellous mosaic in Ravenna. I'm a New Zealander. Well, I was raised in New Zealand, so I stuck in a few New Zealanders. So that's the mirror in the middle. I knew I wanted, Adam and Eve just represent all of us. So I wanted to show that what we're called to as humans. So I wanted to start at the beginning. I'll go into the essence of the fall, what Adam and Eve did wrong. But they're here, and then they get cast out of paradise. So I wanted to know, well, how to dress them. It says from Genesis that the Lord made skins, garments of skin for them, and these were a symbol of mortality. So I've got ideas for how to make mine from this mosaic here from, I think it's from Sicily. So you can see I'm gathering ideas about detail now. So this is the sketch that I finally decided on. All the time I was sharing these ideas with Andy, and he'd give feedback. And then once we had designed the agreed on pencil design, and then started to colour it. That's just a watercolour there. A few technical things. It had to be sent over from the other side of the Atlantic. It had to be carryable, but not flimsy. So we decided on plywood. As you'll see, most icons are made of solid wood, but this is such a big one, there would have been a lot of technical problems, short-term and long-term, making it with planks. So I used plywood, and this design shows you some of the detailing, how the frame was done, and so on. So there's a lot of sort of science and technology involved as well. I'll go now to how you would make a normal panel icon, which includes solid wood. But is there anyone wants to ask a quick question before we progress? We're going to have a lot of questions later. But is there anyone that wants to clarify anything? Okay, we can ask later, and we might have it around. Right, so you can see here, I've got a solid bit of wood and I'm carving out what's called a kivetos. The kivetos is interesting. Aesthetically, it looks better if there's a bit of a raised lip. But it's not like an ordinary work of art, it's framed. But on the other hand, it's just a flat bit of wood, it's not so interesting. So we hollow out the front. It's interesting that the word kivetos, it's a Greek word, means ark. So the Ark of the Covenant or Noah's Ark. So the Ark of the Covenant is made of wood and gold, and God's glory descended upon it. And it's like that with an icon. An icon, in one sense, is just paint and wood. Even on the other hand, it's also, but like the scriptures, it's a means of God speaking to us. The scriptures, the Bible, is just wood pulp and ink, isn't it? But it's more than that, because God reveals himself to us through it. So this idea of an icon being a bit like the Ark of the Covenant, where God's glory is revealed, is a wonderful one. And also the Ark of Noah. Noah's Ark saved creation. So as you'll see, the process of making an icon is a way of raising creation up from good to very good. Like words from a dictionary become a poem, or individual notes become a symphony. Natural wood will warp a bit, so you want to reduce the warpage by putting battens in the back. So these battens are normally tapered, but also they're dovetailed. You can see in the middle image, it's dovetailed. So this allows the plank to expand and contract, but not warp. You can't just nail or screw 2 bits of wood on, because if the wood wanted to contract, it would split. In the old days, they actually did nail bits of wood in the back and they'd split. So this icon on the right here, of St. Catherine, that's a 11th century icon, it's split, and they've had to stick it back together. Due to its size, we had to make this out of plywood. So the next stage is to put what's called gesso on. Egg tempera means an absorbent, brilliant white surface. So this is traditionally done by a mixture of animal glue, linen and whiting. Tends to be chalk, but in Italy they might use marble powder. So this is the equipment here. You've got a double boiler. You don't want to overheat the animal glue, otherwise it'll do nature. An artist friend of mine who was a teacher, he said, you've got to teach your students to love the people you're painting for, to love the subject matter you're painting, and to love the materials that you're making from. So I love to use natural materials as much as possible. So the first stage of putting the gesso on is you glue cloth down. There are 2 types of cloth. So using rabbit skin glue, the first thing I did was glue this cloth down. The idea of that is that this gesso, this sort of white plaster, embeds inside the open weave linen, so it's a lot stronger. The plaster will probably peel off after 100 to 2 years if you put it straight on the wood. We try to make icons to last at least 1,000 years. So literally, we do our very best. So this is, I glued the cloth on now I'm making the gesso. So you put the powder in to this yellow mixture of about 15 parts of water to 1 part of rabbit skin glue. Let it soak, and then you put about 20, 25 layers on. So before you even start to paint, you've got about 25 layers on. And this white is really important. The whole theme I want to return to is transfiguration. That the icon tradition, you're not just painting the outward visible aspect of people or animals, you're showing them in their transfigured state. We remember in the scriptures, Christ went up to Tabor, taking his 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, and he shone with light. So the whole of creation is created to shine like this. As I said earlier, God not only creates things with the word, but he sustains them. Christians aren't pantheists, but we are panentheists. God is working through all things. So having a brilliant white background means that most of these layers here are quite translucent. So some of the light will hit the surface and reflect out, but some of it will go through the paint layer, hit the white background, and come out from inside the painting. Isn't that wonderful? A bit like a stained glass window. It's called transmitted light. So not only the subject matter, but the way we paint it and the materials we use, we enforce this idea that creation is called not just to be material, but material stuff saturated in the glorious light of God. So this affects the element really, the durability of materials, the aesthetic quality of the work. So this is painting on it's quite a tricky thing to do, because if you put a layer on too quickly after the other, it will crack. If you wait too long and it gets bone dry, then it will crack for another reason. So it takes about 8 hours of more or less non-stop work to do a large icon, to put the final layers of gesso on. And it depends on the weather of the day, how quickly each layer dries sufficiently, but not too much. Sometimes you get fine air bubbles. If you get air bubbles, when you come to put the gold in and polish it, those bubbles will show. So you rub it with your fingers to get rid of any bubbles. And then you sand it. Where you paint, there are probably about 6 grades of sandpaper. You don't want to go too smooth to what's called 600 grit. But where you have gold, you go to 1200. So that has, as we'll see in a second, about another 8 further layers of a clay rather than whiting. So you've got to sand that first to about 8 grades of sandpaper. Then you put the bowl on, and that's sanded again for about 6 grades. So there's a lot of sanding, each grade getting finer and finer. And here we started painting yet. I think the design phase of this took 100 hours, so 2.5 solid weeks of working. And then the preparation of the panel and the gilding, we'll go into the gilding later, that's another week. So we haven't even started painting yet, and it's 3.5 weeks. So if you haven't got patience, don't bother doing iconography. So we've got the design, and I blew it up for the size, and then I traced it on. So before you start painting, you need to gild. So there are 2 ways of gilding, but the best is this process. So you put a bowl on, which we're just going to have gilding, which is red clay, but mixed with Vatican glue. I'll tell you why I put that on. So about 8 layers of that, then you sand it. You can see how shiny it is here. And then you start gilding. These are the wonderful traditional implements for gilding. They haven't changed for centuries. You've got your gilder's tips, those wide brushes. You pick up the gold with that. You've got a tamping brush to tamp the gold down, then a bigger brush to smooth it. The leather thing at the top, that's called a gilder's cushion. You put the gold down and then you cut it if you need to. Then on the far right, you've got burnishes to polish the gold, then added an agate, very hard stone. So you get water and alcohol. The alcohol stops the water beading, and you put a bit of that down, and then straight away you lay down gold leaf. You can see here, laying gold leaf. I'm picking it up then, and then you lay it down. In the beginning, it's a bit wrinkly, but after about an hour, you start to polish it. So at the top, you've got these hard agate things, different shapes for burnishing. A bit difficult to see in the photograph, but in the bottom left, you can see the bottom part is shiny, the part going up to the right, that hasn't been burnt. You can see the difference. Now that's where the clay has come in. The clay has been softened a bit by water, so when you polish the gold, it doesn't scratch it. The clay has a bit of give in it. What do you think the gold stands for? Why do we have gold in an icon? Is it just decoration, or what's the purpose of it? What's the symbolism of it? Any thoughts? Shout out.
Royalty.
Royalty, yeah. Light. And what would the light represent? Glory, and God, and glory, yeah, exactly. I love that verse that says, in him we move and live and have our being. So the Lord sustains everyone. When the Lord is on the cross, he was still keeping alive people who were nailing him to the cross. But also the Lord only dwells in the holy. So no matter who they are, the gold on the outside, the background, it's like the water for fish. The fish move in the water and have their being in the water. So the gold has two elements to it. The gold background is that which supports everything. But the gold radiating out from the saints is the Lord who dwells within those who love him. So the gold is not just decoration, it's got an important symbolic value. There's another way of gilding, which is it's not so pretty, but you need to use it outside. It's called oil gilding. Basically, you just put like an oil varnish down, and when it's half set, you put gold on, but you can't polish it. So we've done our gilding, we've got our design, now we're going to paint. Most of the pigments are from the earth. I just love the idea that you make something hopefully beautiful by things that you trample on. We walk on the earth, we walk on stones. Someone takes these and then raises them up and makes them like a jewel in a crown. So the green here is from what's called green earth. Behind that is a yellow ochre. The browns and the yellows are other forms of ochre. But the more brilliant colours, the blue, that's from azurite. It's a semi-precious stone which is ground up. The bright red is cinnabar. They're the main two stones, I think. Yeah, I think I might have used some malachite, another semi-precious stone for the green in some parts. So basically you're taking the God-given raw materials, which are like words in the dictionary I mentioned earlier, but you're transforming them. So I do make some of my own pigments, but I tend to buy them already made. But this is how you make them. You grind up. Sometimes you might use a mortar, and smash up the big block into smaller bits. You need to grind that, and that sort of yellow, that glass thing in the middle, that's the mother, it's called, to grind more finely. And that blue stone is the azurite I made this blue pigment from. So the process of making an icon is a paradigm of our priestly, prophetical and royal calling. So we're called to, like a prophet, hear God's word, as it were, within each thing. And each pigment's different, like the terra vernit, the green. It's a very translucent pigment, so you don't try to make it opaque. The stones are brighter. Red ochre is very strong, so you've got to be careful with that. So each one has its own personality, its own word, as it were. But also we're called to be priestly, but we offer everything to God. We don't just make something beautiful and keep it to ourselves, we offer it back to God. But also a royal calling, where this is why I like to think of our role as royal artists. So I must have a certain authority, if you like, over my medium, over my brushes and the stones, but not to push them down, but to raise them up. So I grind them up, not to make them more ugly, but to make them more beautiful. And of course, this is the mistake that's led to ecological disasters. We've mistaken our rulership, our lordship over creation, just to do what we want with it. We've forgotten that we are prophets who've got to honour what God has given, listen to his voice. We've forgotten to give thanks to God like a priest for it. So we just go around treating it like a bank full of pleasures we can take from industry. So we take these things, a bit like someone who made Christ's garment. We remember that in the scriptures it says that Christ's faith shone with light, but also, and this is wonderful, his garments. And of course this light is the divine light, it's not ordinary light. So understandable that Christ's face shone with light, but that his garments, his inanimate garments should shine with light, should participate in his glory. So the whole idea is to sort of take, as it were, the flax of the created raw world, and then you make it into a garment which Christ wraps around himself and participates in his glory. This is one reason why the Greek word used for what we now call nature, erroneously I think, is cosmos. I like to call the whole wonderful created world cosmos, which means adornment, adornment. So the whole creation is meant to be an adornment for the body of Christ, an adornment for the New Jerusalem. Not just a thing, but it's to become personalized, as it were, like Christ's garment, and it's part of his being, as it were. There are actually two ways of painting icons. Now we've got our pigments, we're ready to start painting. There's a membrane technique, and then there's a proplasmos. I'll show you what they mean. I painted this primarily with the membrane technique. So here we have an unfinished illuminated manuscript which shows the underpainting technique. What do you notice a difference between those two, the top and the bottom one? It's a difference. What's the difference? There's more colour on the top, exactly. So the bottom one is the first stage. So what they've done is they've just modelled the form. They're not bothered about colour yet, they're just modelling the form like a black and white photograph. And then having established that, they then start putting colour in, glazes in. So the word membrane refers to that first wash over the modelling. That's a technique I tend to use, especially when I'm teaching, because if you're juggling colour and form at the same time, students get a bit confused. But if you put colour aside initially and just work on form, it's one stage at a time. So this is my workbench when I was painting this. Various brushes, the different pigments, and the egg all ready to go. I mentioned earlier about glazes, so this illustrates this. So you can see here in my little drawing, you've got the white gesso at the bottom, and you've got the pigment, your gritty pigment, mixed with egg. So some of the light coming in hits the surface and bounces off, but some of it penetrates the paint because there's not a lot of pigment. If there's a lot of pigment, none of the light can get through, but there's quite a bit of water and egg there, so some of the light can get through. And it reflects out from inside the paint layer. So the icon on the right, I don't know how well it shows up here, but you can see that there's a lot of whiteness behind the pigment. So a lot of the light is actually coming off the gesso from behind. Whereas the blue, by comparison, is a bit more opaque. So you can see the difference not just in colour, but in the translucency. So I'm going to show you the stages of two icons. I just had good photographs of these compared to this process, but the process was the same. So this is called the underpainting phase, where you're just painting the form without the colour. This is Joseph here, so he's an old man, so you're painting the wrinkles. That's the Annunciation on the right. And the next stage is the membrane. So over Joseph, I put a mixture of yellow and red ochre. And you can see blue and red over the garments there, but translucent enough for the shadow to come through. That's like the middle tone. We're going to put highlights on and re-establish the shadows, so we're in the middle stage here. So here on Joseph, I've started to add highlights, so a bit of yellow ochre and white. And on the right, you can see I started to add highlights on the garments. And then further highlighting, each highlight having a bit more white in it, or a bit lighter and getting smaller and smaller. That's the finished one. There are a lot of other stages in between. You put roses of red in and all sorts of things, but that's the basic idea. So here, these are the stages here. The blue is quite expensive, so having mixed it up, and once it's dry, you can't reuse it. So I mixed up the azurite and then painted most of the blue areas in one go. It's a tall icon, as you can see in my new studio. It's probably got a ceiling only about that high, so it was quite difficult to do the bottom. I had to saw back after. I had to sort of jig up on my big work desk, some sort of stand behind, so I could have it about that angle. I'd sit down and paint the bottom. Then gradually you add the backgrounds, and then gradually add the detail. I didn't keep a record of how long it took to paint, but I don't know, a month perhaps a bit longer, I can't recall. So very quickly, yes. I was reluctant to call it an icon initially, even though it's done in the icon style, because an icon is something that is used in a church service. So you can see here a lady kissing us, she's kissing the saint depicted, process them. On the top right-hand corner is my parish church. I've got frescoes up. But this was more like a teaching icon. But we had this letter from the Patriarch of Constantinople, who's the head of the Greek Orthodox Church. Someone sent him a photograph, and he sent this letter saying that he blessed it for use in worship. So we might see smaller versions of this in churches. The previous patriarch made September the 1st, which is the first day of the church calendar, the day of thanksgiving for creation. It's wonderful, a thanksgiving for creation. So who knows, it may be used for that, or simplified version used for that. So that's the final stage. Once you've painted an icon, you release it. So it's used. You see people processing it here, it's put on the walls, it's knocked about, it's loved a bit. So some people say, isn't it sad to sort of send an icon off? But no, that's, many of you are mothers. You don't want to be hanging around with your baby in your womb all your life, do you? You want to deliver the child and see it grow up. Well, that's like a delivery to me, to release the icon, to Point Loma, wherever it's going. Let's quickly go through the stages of the other technique, the proplasmos. You start actually with the dark, flat layer. You can see the Mother of God's face is completely flat. And then you just start adding highlights. See, it gets lighter and lighter. So the difference is that you don't start with this monochrome model. You just start with a dark shadow, then you only add lights, leaving the dark parts untouched for the shadow. I'll finish just by a few of the stylistic elements of an icon, because you notice that they're not photographic, they're a bit abstract. And the reason for this is that particularly the faces want to indicate the inner spiritual state of the subject, in this case, the Mother of God in Christ. So compassion and bright sadness. So you have this wonderful phrase in Greek, amorlipi, which means bright sadness. So the eyes might look a bit sad, but there's a certain warmth in the lips. And that's because even though they're in heaven, the saints co-suffer with us, they're compassion with us, they're with us in our sufferings. But on the other hand, they're full of joy, so there's a slight warmth. And it's one of the things that's difficult to balance. You get some icons that are a bit too fierce or a bit too grieving, not enough joy, and get others that are a bit sentimental, too much happiness. I wouldn't want to pay in front of an icon with a big cheesy smile if I was having a hard time. I want to feel that the saint was with me. On the other hand, I wouldn't want the saint's face to be so sad that I thought it would lift me up. It's a bit like if you're on the beach and saw someone drowning and you can't swim very well. You've got two choices really. Do I heroically jump in and drown with them? Or do I just say, cheer up, it'll be all right? Or do I go off and get someone to help save them? So the joy of the saint is like something that can bring us out of our sorrow. But sadness shows us that they see us drowning, they're with us, they want to find a way of saving us. So there's bright sadness as one element in icons. Also, the organs of reception are normally enlarged a bit. So you can see here on the right, that's Mary Magdalene. Her eyes are slightly enlarged and her nose is slightly elongated. And that's because the saints, above all, are contemplators of God. They listen to God, they smell the joy of paradise. And that fills them with wisdom and power and love, so they don't have to say or do a lot for a lot to happen. So the lips are a bit smaller. You don't get violent gestures. I love it how Christ said one word to Lazarus, rise. And Lazarus rises from the dead. He didn't write a thesis of 10,000 words about mortality, and Lazarus is still dead in the grave. Just one word. I've known some saints in my life, and I've gone away from a short time with them transformed, just with a few words, because their hearts were illumined, but they could see what I needed to hear. So in conclusion, icons are not just art objects to look at, but they constitute an integral part of the Orthodox Church, but also of all traditional Christianity right from the first centuries. All the different elements, not just the painted icons, but the incense, the lighting, the architecture, the acoustics, are all part of a single sort of symphony of praise. Icons affirm that Christ is God become flesh and therefore depictable. There was a period in Byzantine history where emperors tried to enforce iconoclasm, where it means to destroy icons, but the church said no. God has become visible. So to say we can't depict Christ means that you don't believe he's become visible and become flesh. But also we have icons of saints, And that's to show that Christ became one of us, precisely so he can raise us up and be deified and be bearers of the Holy Spirit, be Christophori, Christ bearers. But also, as this icon shows, it's not just humans whom Christ came to save and transfigure, the whole of creation. So when we want to think of this as one icon of the church isn't just us humans, but it's the whole of creation, as it were, the garments that Adam and Eve wear, it's the whole of creation. When we are close to God, the whole of creation rejoices and finds its direction. When we depart from God, the whole of creation suffers. So in that sense, I'm quite glad we're going through an ecological crisis. It teaches us that something's wrong with us. It's like if I had pain in my arm, I know something's wrong behind the skin. I can put a painkiller on, but that's not the problem. The problem is behind, as it were, the scenes. So the stress we're putting on the earth is actually the result of the stress that we created inside ourselves first. So I think the way we worship, the way we do art, all these things are where we should start if we want to change the world. We want to, within us, the intimacy of our worship, the intimacy of our prayer, the way we treat the material world in our little circle. That should be the paradigm for how we treat the material world as a revelation of God and as the raw materials, not to crush, but to raise up and make more articulate. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Aidan, very much. We do have some time for some questions and discussion. So I'd actually like to start. I've got a question. So Aidan, we often hear that, or I've often heard that icons are written as opposed to painted. And so I'm wondering, can you explain why they said that they're written, and how important do you think that distinction is between the words written and painted?
Yeah. I don't particularly like that phrase, icons are written. I can see why, but I'll go through the why. The Greek word is agiografos, holy writing, ikonographos. And that graphos can mean writing, but also it can mean painting. It actually came originally from to carve letters, scribed out. But those who say icons are written, not painted, are just trying to make the point that iconographers aren't painting from their fantasy. They're not just sort of imagining something and expressing their ego or what their opinion about life. They're actually traditio, handing on and traditionizing, as it were, what they've received from the church. Like a translation of the Bible doesn't change things if they don't like them. They've got to understand the essence of what's being said in the original Greek or the Hebrew and translate it, handing on what they've received, using their creativity. So that's the idea behind the term icon writing rather than painting. So I understand that. But personally, I think it denigrates what painting can do. I think writing gets detail beautifully in a way that painting can't, but in painting does something that writing can't do, which is to, like, people see this in a touch in a way that if we had written between us a 20,000-page book, not people would have written it. So I prefer to say icon painting. Yeah, that's my own opinion. Thank you. Great question.
Great, thanks. All right, who else got questions? We'll run to you.
Hi, thank you so much. In the Orthodox Church, there are certain places where certain icons and iconography go. For instance, the dome above is on the Prater, you have Jesus looking down upon you. In the apse, you have Mary and Jesus. So where does this go? Because I've never seen a creation icon in an Orthodox church. Although you showed us some at the beginning, I think it's San Marco and then somewhere else. Where do they have them? Is it a stable place or does it vary because they're rare, I think?
Yeah, very good question. This is why I said I was reluctant in the beginning to call this an icon. It's done in the icon style. And this is actually a particular one that's going to go in the foyer of the library. So an Orthodox icon would be put somewhere where it's part of worship, part of liturgy, or part of the prayer at home. So in that sense, this is not going to be used liturgically. But on the other hand, it is a very important place in the library. You're going in to read books. And this will remind the students and the professors that, in fact, ultimately, they're not studying books, they're studying God's creation. You might read about biology, about fish, or whatever in a book, but really you're studying this. Your study is part of perceiving God's presence in the whole world. But it's an interesting book written by a scholar called McGuckin, saying that before iconoclasm, nature, birds, animals, all sorts of things, were actually much more part of church iconography. After iconoclasm, we had less. There might have been a desire not to be taken as idolaters, we don't know. But it's interesting that these decorative bands and mosaics weren't just decoration, they're actually saying that Christ loves the whole creation and everything has been brought into the kingdom of God. So I think, like the icon screen here I made, the top has got carvings of vines, and they're not just there as decoration to show that everything participates. So the answer to your question about this particular icon, who knows? The patriarch who wrote that letter may want a smaller version, which should be put on the anemoy on the 1st of September, where we have a feast of the Thanksgiving for creation.
Do you know where the one in San Marco is placed?
Yeah, that's in the dome. San Marco has 5 domes, so you can't have Christ photographed in all 5 domes. So one has got Pentecost, we've got various other themes there. That is also often found in baptistries. The baptistry in Florence it is, that has the days of creation. The reason for that is that baptism is a new creation. The priest anoints the water, exercises the water, he anoints it with oil, in other words, it's filled with the Holy Spirit, and then it becomes grace-bearing again. So creation is actually sort of saved in the blessing of the water and makes it God-bearing again, Christ-bearing again, Spirit-bearing. So that's probably the most common place where you find such creation icons in baptistries.
Thanks for your patience as I run to you, but we're recording this, so we just want to make sure we can hear you.
Thank you for presenting. You said earlier that you made it out of egg yolk, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering about how many eggs you had to count.
I love these practical questions, yes. And it goes a long way, probably only about 6.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so, yeah, because I like to apply my paint in sort of thin glazes. I would say roughly 6.
So it's a very thin glaze of egg yolk.
Yeah. What I love about iconography is it's not just the end result, hopefully, which can be a blessing to people, but the process of making it is actually a paradigm of how we are to live. So I like to use pigments and egg with as it were, a wholly gentle history. So I like to use free-range eggs and use natural pigments and ideally wood that's renewable and so on.
Yeah, I thought it would be a lot more, but I guess 6 go a long way.
Yeah, okay. It's actually quite an economical way of painting. Some iconographers use acrylic paint, but I just hate using it. As I said, I like to use materials with a holy history, and all I can think of is factories painting with acrylic. Whereas with this, sometimes people go somewhere like I think mentioned about Sinai, where Moses was, and gave me a rock from Sinai. So I grind it up and turn it into a red pigment, so that it's not just a colour to me, but it's got a whole history behind it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I actually had a couple questions, but I'm just wondering how flexible are you as the artist in terms of how you present different holy figures? I mean, I noticed that position of Christ as he sits, way the saints are standing, the way the angels are flying, seem to be fairly stylized. How much, and I don't know about the other elements, trees and the animals and so forth, how much flexibility do you have as the artist in terms of changing that, or pretty much, when you present Christ seated on the throne, it's got to be in a certain position, or can you
It's a good
change
question.
that?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that the principles, which are timeless, which you want to adhere to. Like this to say 5 of us here are portrait painters and we all did a portrait of you. But you are the parameter, it's got to look like you and represent something of your character. But all of them, let's just say they're all equally gifted and experienced, we'll all do it slightly differently. But if I just make up a face and say this is you think, hey, it doesn't look like me. So in iconography, you're depicting timeless spiritual truths, so that gives you certain parameters. But different people as individuals, but also different commissions, different countries, different churches, mean you've got to respond differently. So I've just finished a fresco in a Romanesque style church. So there I drew on the Romanesque style, which is from about the 11th to 12th century. Whereas others might be inspired more by 6th century Roman work or whatever. I do a lot of icons of British saints. So if it's a Welsh saint, I might draw on Welsh influences. So iconography is a bit like a tree. It has roots in the ground, but also reaches up to heaven. So you've got to be rooted in the culture you're in and draw the best from that. Same with architecture. You'll find Russian architecture is different from Byzantine, which is different from early French stuff, 10th century. You're responding to the climate often, to the light, to the materials available. So it is really, really creative, but it's not creative in the modern sense of the ego. I just want to be different, so I'll just do something different for its own sake. You're always a servant, so you're responding to the place, responding to the person. Yes.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. You had talked about icons being used in worship service, and my question is, what is the nature of how they're used in terms of, is the viewer to know what that icon means or represents and they are to look at it, or are there words that accompany the icon, or is it through meditation just on the visual image, or does the individual know a certain prayer that comes with that particular icon, or is it more abstract and they're just enjoying the beauty of it?
Very good question. It's great that you realise that icons are used in worship and not just looked at. So they have many, many functions. I lived as a hermit for 6 years and converted a small chapel, or barn into a chapel, and frescoed it all around. So when one of the functions of this fresco, if one takes it as a single element, even though there are lots of saints around, was to show that when I, as a hermit, by myself a lot of the time, started a service, I'd get up at about 4 in the morning and do matins. I wasn't actually starting the service. I was just joining in the ceaseless worship of heaven. So all the saints around, as it were, when I finished the service and left, they stayed there because they were in heaven worshiping. So that's more just establishing the atmosphere that worship on earth is participation in the ceaseless worship of heaven. But then each saint is individual. There's St. Cuthbert from Britain, St. Anthony from Egypt. They had names on. So I would kiss those icons as a way of greeting them. Like when you meet a friend, you hug them. You're greeting them. So we kiss icons. We're not worshipping the image, of course. We're just greeting the saint. But like you might have a photograph of your mother or your father, and you treat that photograph with respect because you want to convey that respect to your parents. In terms of the word, if it's a feast icon like the Transfiguration, that icon is put in an alloy. It's like a sort of a sloped thing, a bit like this. And we would be in church and listening to these amazing hymns, which are profoundly theological. So this would, as it were, illuminate elements of the icon we see, and the icon would illuminate elements of the theology. So there's this word and image hand in hand. Also in places like Greece and traditionally Orthodox countries, you'll see icons everywhere, in a car, in a taxi, in a bus. And that's to remind us that prayer can be offered anywhere. If you're in a car with an icon, you're reminded, well, actually, in a sense, I'm in a little church here. You pray and thank God. So, it has many, many, many functions. But above all, the icon is there to bring us into a relationship with the persons depicted. If it's an icon of St. Peter, it's not there to say, think about St. Peter 2,000 years ago. St. Peter is alive in Christ. And that's why icons are called doors. You came into this room through a door. You didn't just stand at the door and look at the door. You came through it. and then you forgot the door. So icons are actually there to become redundant. I'm interested in meeting Christ. I can meet Christ through reading the Bible, but also through the icon. But the icon is a means of passing through itself to the person depicted.
I'm going to pass the mic over to Mike. On the way, though, I want to sneak in my own question real fast. Aidan, you talked about, in a sense, giving birth to icons, right? Do you have any icons in your home that are your own work? And what are the circumstances like behind that? And just related to that, if you have icons from other artists, like, what does it take to make the cut to make it into your home?
I know.
What attracts you the most to bring an icon into your home?
Thank you. Yes, I have some icons I painted. One was a gift to my wife, and I have some icons painted by other people. One is a Georgian one. Someone gave it to me, but I just love the Georgian style. You're asking, sir, about the freedom you have. Well, the Georgian icon's got a very specific style. The eyes are not in the middle, a bit higher up, they're more abstracted. There's something elegant about this. And then a friend of mine in the Russian cathedral that was in London, she sold icons she imported from Russia. And this is a beautiful one of Christ, actually adapted from a mosaic from St. Mark's of Venice. I just loved it. And I learned a lot from that, so I bought it in part because I love it, but also I knew I'd learn a lot from it as a professional painter. So it's like sort of analysing the pigments and how they laid up the paint. Yes.
Okay, I wanted to comment on an earlier question about the formation of characters or saints on the icon and why they look similar from icon to icon. So if we look up at the picture that's on the screen, which is in your home church, and we look at Christ as he appears on the creation icon, he's in a very similar position and posture. And I recall coming 10 years ago to England and talking to you about a commission that I asked you to paint. And I couldn't articulate exactly what I wanted to do or what I wanted you to paint, but I looked up on the wall and I said, yeah, I like that one. And you said, okay. And if you've been over to the Keller Gallery, you'll see the icon that Aidan painted for me 10 years ago, which looks very similar, the position of Christ, to the one here and the one which I presume you painted. But there was an older icon behind it, was there not? In the paint or in the plaster somewhere?
No, well, we thought there might have been, there wasn't,
Yeah.
To the left is a painting of the martyrdom of Thomas Becket from 1380. So we thought there might have been behind that an old one, but it wasn't, which is why I can paint on it.
So, yeah, the continuity is intentional, but it's also, as you say, like a tree. It's another ring on the tree.
Yeah.
A presentation of Christ. Thanks.
We have time for just a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
When you're doing a commission like this, how do you choose what sort of art style to depict the icon in? Like a description, for example.
I missed the first part, sorry.
Sorry, when you're doing a commission like this, how do you choose which art style to paint the icon?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We'll go back to this one here. This is a very old English church, so the fresco, that's fresco with plaster at the top. I drew on the early British tradition, so there the style was inspired by a 12th century illuminated manuscript called the Bury St. Edmund's Gospel. Whereas if I was in France or Greece, I'd be inspired by different. It's not a copy, but it's inspired by that. Here, we wanted the specific species to be identifiable, so I didn't want to be so abstracted people couldn't tell, especially scientists couldn't give the exact scientific name for it. So I didn't want the figures to be too abstracted in comparison to that, so I drew more on, I don't know how to describe it, Byzantine style. It's interesting that Greece, before it converted to Christianity, of course, had the more modelled sculptural form, so they really understood three-dimensional modelling. So their icons, though they're more flattered than classical Greek work, nonetheless are well modelled, they understand anatomy, whereas the Russians didn't have a figurative tradition by and large. when they're converted. So their icons tend to be flat and a bit more abstract. So for this particular one, because of the animals being quite specifically modelled, I drew more inspiration from the more modelled Byzantine style. So all the time you're trying to think, well, what's going to serve Christ better? What's going to make it easiest for people to meet Christ through this? And that's dictated to by the culture, the purpose of it, all sorts of things.
I just wanted to thank you for your book, Beauty, Spirit, and Matter, and just make people aware of it. That your book is kind of like a window to orthodoxy, not just iconography. It explains the whole theology of the church and the nature of the church. So if you could take a look at the book, you'll find out it's a lot richer than just iconography.
Thank you so much. If we have some copies for sale, this book has a number of independent chapters, and as my friend said, it's not so much just about icons per se, but it's more about the vision behind the icon, seeing everything as an image of God. So I'm looking at different aspects of human life, so I look at ecology through the point of view of the icon, or the theology of the icon, the nature of the human person. The word person in Greek and in Latin means face. So my personhood is fulfilled in relationship with you. Not individualistically, but to be a person is to be in love, like the Holy Trinity. We're made in God's image as Holy Trinity. So God is love because He's a relationship with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So I look at that, the nature of beauty, looking at some abstract art from the early 20th century, all through behind the icon. So I encourage you to look at that book.
If I can just ask one more lighthearted question, then we'll wrap it up. Aidan, after 40 years of doing this, are there any particular tasks or steps that you've gone through that still make you sweat? You have to hold your breath just because, just the inherent complexity of it and the risk of not doing it right. And then the second question is, are there any steps or tasks that you just really look forward to, that are just fun?
Well, let's start with these, like faces. I just love painting faces. I was a sculptor for 4 or 5 years before starting iconography. And faces to me are just everything really. So I've got more experience in that, so I looked at faces. The difficult things, I mean, gilding can be pretty nerve-wracking. A lot can go wrong. Because I was more trained as a sculptor, not as a painter, through choosing a good colour scheme was a bit stressful at times, but now I've learned various principles, so it's not so difficult. I can limit the palettes from the beginning, limit the number of pigments, and I've understood more about complementary colours, all these sorts of things. But technically, probably gilding. I've been doing it for 40 years, but still things go wrong. Put another layer on. A little bit about gilding. You have water and alcohol mixed together, and you put that on your gold on top. So you always make a bit more water and gin than you need. So when you finish gilding, you can drink what's left over to cool your nerves.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right. Can we give Aidan a round of applause? Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.